My name is Danish Farhan. You mispronounced the name of the company. It's Xische, not Quiche. No worries. However, I've got to add, I'm not an expert. I founded the company about 11 years ago. We are a boutique digital media consulting firm. The reason I say we're not an expert is in the social media field, anyone who tells you that they're an expert, you've got to watch out. It's only 2.5 years old. All right, so the title of the presentation is supposedly Measuring Social Media ROI. I happen to think that that's actually a really, really dumb title. So I'm here to kind of give you a little bit of a different experience. Hopefully it'll be worth your money. The reason you've got a business card on the screen is because I tend to use the analogy, measuring social media ROI is a bit like measuring you receiving a business card from me today. Can you put a value to that? You can't. So it's actually a pretty dumb statement if you say, I want to measure return on investment on social media. It's got to be a little bit more minute, our conversation. I'll give you a simpler analogy. Have you got any parents in the room? 2, 3, okay, a few of you. And the rest of us were kids at one point. Now imagine if I asked you to try and calculate return on investment on your 1-year-old within the span of the 1 year. Do you realize how difficult that will be? I mean, you can't see any changes. They don't start to speak immediately. They don't actually get up and start running. And yet, you know something is going on behind the scenes. It's a bit of a latent process. And I think that's the analogy I would use to say social media is still pretty much like a baby. We needed to grow up just a little bit. I think while social media has risen to serious prominence in the last 2 or 3 years, to the point where brands are now spending an enormous amount of money on social media engagement and monitoring, we still don't think we've got the formula. And if somebody here does, I want to be attending their session. If I ask you again, another way of putting the silliness of this, if I asked you, what's the return on investment of your receptionist? Do you think you can tell me that? It's not an option anymore. You need to have a receptionist. It's a bit like you need to be on Twitter, you need to be on Facebook. It's really not an option anymore. There is a misnomer that there is a God metric to measure return on investment for social media, that there is this one thing that you can count, and that's going to show you how successful or unsuccessful you are, and whether you're spending money well or you're wasting it away. And so I'm sorry to break the news, but there is no God metric. Brands, and I'm sure a lot of us here, tend to be obsessed with the like button. Would you agree? It's about how many likes I get. It's a bit like a tip box. I think we're just trying to collect likes. We have no idea why we're doing it. We know that we want to get 20,000, 100,000, 2 million likes. We don't really care what happens after that. And that's sadly the reality for pretty much all of the brands around. On Twitter, it's about followers. You know, the interesting difference between Facebook and Twitter, I normally say this, is Facebook is a bit fake. Twitter is a bit like real life. If I like you, Mo, I want to follow you. But if you don't like me, you don't have to be my friend. On Facebook, I'm forcing you to be my friend if I want to be your friend. So I think, you know, you've got different measurement metrics here. But again, it's about the masses. It's about how many Twitter followers I've got, how many Facebook fans I've got. I actually think it boils down to people being really confused. So you're sitting in a massive organization, and your job is to convince the board that social media is the right thing to do for you. And so you go, you know what? What's the most interesting and easiest thing that I can count when I go to somebody's Facebook page or a Twitter page? I can actually count the fans. So that must be it, because otherwise they wouldn't put it right up there, would they? So fans, and our obsession with fans, is partly because that's what the social networks give you first. They actually just tell you, look, you've got 1,000 friends, that's awesome. That means in real life, you're not a loser, you're actually a popular guy or a girl. Again, using an analogy, I'm sorry I'm using as many analogies, I just find this to be so silly. You know, imagine me saying that because I've got the most sort of enormous population in the Gulf, I also happen to be the most successful country. Population has nothing to do with success. And so your fan base has nothing to do with the success of your page. They're very, very different conversations. And I'm going to try and dissect that a little bit. How do you do that? There is, again, no rule book. Every single brand is different. No two brands. Again, even competitors are not the same. They've got different challenges. They've got different scale. They've got different client bases. They've got different territories. They're just not the same at all. Measurement metrics are not the same either. All right, now I'm going to get down to a few practical things to try and digress through for social media itself, and tell me if you agree. And I'd like this panel to be a bit more, you interrupt me and ask me questions straight away. I don't want you to have to wait until 10 minutes later. So Mo, please encourage them to do so. Do you realize a lot of brand managers tend to tell you, I want to be on this Twitter thing. You know, I want to be on Facebook. It's like it's a destination. It's like I want to be in whatever, in Harrods at the moment. You know, it's not a destination. It's actually not the journey either. It's the car you're driving to get to wherever it is you're driving, and you continue driving on. So it's an ongoing process. This analogy really helps explain that Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, the blog are not one specific place that you get to at all. Never is. Another misnomer, social media is a sales tool. Where are my sales? You know, I consult a lot of boards of government and non-government organizations in the region, and one of the first questions that people ask me and my team is, where are the sales? How can you prove to me that me spending an X amount of money on hiring you guys to run our Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts and monitor our blogs is actually led to physical sales? And I always tell them, I'm not too sure how they're linked at this point. Because you can't say, because I've built a brilliant office, people are going to show up. You can't say, because I've got a phenomenal showroom on Side Road, people are actually going to throng to it. You've got to do other things. You've got to have a marketing campaign. You've got to run some PR activity. You're going to have to drive the brand awareness out. Nothing's changed with social media. Social media isn't a magic pill that will suddenly get hordes of people to understand your brand and to know who you are and what you do at all. Be ready to change. I'd like to give an example here. Imagine there's a chef, a celebrity chef, who wants to publish a book. Now, back in the day, they'd have to hire a research agency to do focus groups to try and figure out, you know, are people going to like my chicken recipe more, or are they going to like my sort of vegetarian platter? Now, you're going to take a wild guess, and you're going to look at maybe 50 people and say, this is how the entire world's going to react to my recipe book. Now, today, if that chef is on Facebook or on Twitter and starts to tweet about a certain recipe about chicken, again, going back to that analogy, and you realize that there has been 2 RTs and 0 likes on Facebook, whereas the same thing happens an hour later, and the chef posts something about, I don't know, roast chicken or perhaps roast lamb, and suddenly you've got 150 people that have shared it, that have liked it. Now, wouldn't you learn from that and do something in order to get the right publication out? So your recipe book is now going to be very different because you listened to what happened. You didn't just count the fan base. You didn't say, because I posted the recipe, I had 150 new fans. No, you said, of my fans, how many actually decided to do something with my recipe? And that's exactly what I mean by learning. And this is going to be different for every single client. Within the client, it's going to be different for every single initiative or campaign. And that's sort of the chef analogy. If you're not ready to change, and this for a chef is really easy, for a business is a lot more difficult. You're going to have to be ready to change your business and tweak it because you're getting market intelligence on an hourly basis that you could never do so at almost no cost. If you run your own Facebook account, if you run your own Twitter pages, you're not paying anything. I mean, it's free of charge, so that's why we get bombarded with advertising. But we're not paying anything. It's actually free of charge. Metrics are media agnostic. What do I mean by this? Now, today, how do you measure the effectiveness of a billboard on Sheikh Zayed Road? Anybody? I'm sure there's media buyers here. Please tell me. How do you know the number of cars that have passed through Sheikh Zayed Road yesterday? Salik? Salik will tell you how many people have paid. Salik will not tell you how many people buy. So essentially, a newspaper is very, very much the same story. You get the newspaper at home, but I can't be sure that you actually looked at my advert. And that's precisely what I mean by it's agnostic to what media does. It's very much the same. In order to promote your initiatives on Facebook or Twitter, you're going to have to do the same thing as you would with a traditional campaign. And that is extremely important to understand. Again, no magic pill here. Sorry to disappoint. So the question is, I've just been going on about, well, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. It's not measurable. It's not measurable. What am I doing wasting your time here? What we've done is essentially come up with a checklist of 6 things that you can do in order to get closer to what you'd like to measure. I'm not saying this is your success story already. It's one step closer to doing what you need to do. So sorry I wasted as much time, but I needed to bring some context to this. The first is define it. Ideally, if, now here I'm going to start taking live examples, okay? So we work with the fastest growing bank in the region, and we wanted to try and understand with their board, what do they want to do with social media? What do they want to accomplish? And what do they want to measure? Is it going to be how many people love my product? How many people hate my product? You know, I've never met anyone in this country that loves their bank. Does anyone love their bank here? I mean, in the UAE, that's an impossibility, I think. Nobody likes their bank. So to go in and say, here you go, please come and take a shot at us, you know, we're out in the open and you can post on our Facebook wall, is a pretty dangerous proposition. And yet, you know, we decided to convince the board to go on because we want to accomplish a certain set of things. Now, let me tell you what that is in the case of a bank. So in the case of a bank, we need to understand, the client needs to understand, how many people actually know who the bank is, A. Second, how many people are existing customers of the bank, 2. Third, is how many people have interacted with the bank and have had a really, really retarded customer service quality level, right? Because you need to know, they're already out there. They're talking about you, whether you know it or not. Now it's about taking ownership of it. When you define those things, then you say, all right, how many people can I influence by behaving the way we do on Twitter? So if the bank that I'm talking about, if you go and check out their Twitter feed, we're actually out there, very, very casual, trying to have real conversations with people about everything from weather to holidays. And I think that's a metric to measure. Now, if you go further, you say, well, how's that generating to leads or sales? Leads and sales are, again, indirect ways of measuring one step beyond this. And I'll get to that later. So the point is, you've got to spend about 40% of your entire budget and time on social media as a brand on first figuring out what you want to measure. Because if you're not doing this, then you're going to be fan counting again. And I'm sorry to say this, but fan counting gets you nowhere except get your clicks on your own page go higher. Because you keep checking every 15 minutes or so. Exposure. Now, exposure is a term that I use loosely here. And this really, in web language or analytics language, refers to views or total views. So much like you measure views of a certain website, I'm talking about views of all your social outposts. Now, again, to clarify, social media isn't just your Facebook page. It's not a Twitter feed. It's also your blog. It's forums where people are discussing things about you. It's a YouTube channel where people are posting responses to content that you've created, for example. All of these things put together form social media. Your exposure is a total count of how many times all of your content has been viewed. All right? What has been the exposure of your content? That's the first thing to measure in a very simplistic way. Again, like I said, every client has a different requirement, but these tend to work. Second is connections. Now, connections are a little bit beyond views. So yes, they could mean views of any kind. However, connections are things like likes, things like follows, things like friends, things like subscribe to. You know, that's called a connection, where if somebody has given you permission to come in and talk to me on a daily, minute basis if you're going to be spamming them. But yeah, so that's a connection. So that's the second thing you do. Not the first. The first is total views. Second is connections. The third is engagement. And this, in my opinion, is the most important thing. You notice Facebook sort of revamped. Oh, actually, before I get to that, how many of you actually run corporate pages on Facebook at the moment? Okay, fabulous. And are you the end decision maker on this? You are, fabulous. But the rest of them aren't. So you've got to get permission on things that your boss might not actually understand, correct? I mean, that happens a lot. But yeah, so engagement is something that really matters. I'll tell you why. Engagement is any sort of consumption of what I've done. So just because I've viewed it doesn't mean I've actually engaged with it, right? So that's just a view. Engagement is when I've liked it, when I've commented on it, when I've reposted it, when I've retweeted it, when I've used an @ on Twitter and mentioned myself or the brand. That is engagement. And this is extremely important. Now, back to what Facebook did a couple of months ago, I think. You notice it really revamped everything and confused us again. Do you remember that? So all of the brands were scurrying around trying to go, but we just spent so much money trying to fix this, and now you've done it again. Now, what they did, another number that started to show up is people talking about this. Do you guys come across that? So it's number of fans, you've got people talking about this. What does that really mean? That means you've got that many people that are engaged with you or your content. It could be one little like button. It could be an entire post. It could be an image. It could be a video that somebody pressed play on. That is essentially engagement. And this is far more important. How do you measure engagement? Ideally, you should do this in a percentage of your audience. Now, we run a page for an automotive brand, and our engagement as of last week was almost 60%. So that means of the 13,000 fans that we did have, and we launched about 5 or 6 months ago, 60% are actually doing something with it. That's a good number. Now, you might have an airline that's got 500,000 fans, but you've got 0.01% that are engaging with it. Yes, that's a decent number, but if you look at the overall captive audience you have, that's really pathetic. And so you've got to look at, sorry, go on.
How do you measure engagement? Do you have a time frame, or is it open-ended?
You've got to measure it. Do you want to repeat it for the, or I can repeat your question. So he goes, how can you measure, or how do you measure engagement over a time period, or is it open-ended? I think you could do both. So you could do something called lifetime engagement. So since you started, so say January 1st of this year until today, how many people have been engaged with me or my brand? That's one way. Second, you could say, in the last week, because I launched a new campaign, how many people have I got engaged after I launched that campaign? You see, that's a lot more interesting than how many new likes I got because I launched that campaign, right? Because likes are doing what? Yes, they could hit the like button, but if they don't do anything with your content, that's a waste of a like. So that's engagement, all right? Then comes referrals. Now, referrals is something that used to be a little bit harder to focus on in social media, but today, social media isn't your eventual destination. We've clarified this, right? So things don't actually happen purely on social media. You want to try and drive social media onto a destination of some sort. Now, in some cases, it's a portion of a website. In other cases, it's a microsite. In some cases, it's an app, all right? Or you're driving people to a store. That is a referral. That's something that you can measure, because this is getting closer to your management's question. What's this doing for me? Is it actually driving people to my store? Yes or no? Can you prove it? No, I can't. But can you prove that I'm not driving people to the store? No, you can't either. So it's a pretty pointless conversation because you keep going round and round. Referrals is another important metric. Then comes conversions, right? So yes, you've referred people to your site. Great. But has that led to money for me as a brand, as a client? I don't think so. That's when you've got to figure out if you can tweak your analytical tools enough to say, me as Danish Farhan, I'm on the page of a certain brand. I click through, I go to a destination, and when I'm on that destination, your site is intelligent enough to figure out that I've actually come from Facebook, and it's further intelligent enough to figure out they came from a specific message or a specific post. Then you say, buy now. So if I'm an electronics retailer, I've actually had a lead from Facebook, and I've actually purchased something. What does that tell you? I have 1,000 people on my Facebook page, of which 10 this week have come back and actually purchased something. Now, isn't that a 10% conversion rate? This is the hardest thing to do. It's actually very, very interesting if you put a monetary value. Now, for those of you that weren't here, I used an analogy in the beginning. I said social media measuring social media return on investment is a bit silly because it's like asking, what's the return on investment of a business card that I give you today? It's nothing. When someone likes you, they just give you their business card. Nothing else. Nothing else has happened. So I can't put a dollar value on that. You might think I'm an idiot. So you might think, I'm worth 10 filths. Or you might think I'm worth $1,000. But that's really irrelevant. And nobody's going to agree with those metrics anyway. So conversions is that. And sorry. And now I shut up. Sorry, I needed to make sure this slide came through. All right. I wanted to keep this relatively short because I want to take questions and I want to give you real examples. So please flood away. No worries. Can you pass me that bottle of water, please? Sorry. That water?
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dinesh.
No worries.
Just want to have a look. I'm guessing a lot of people have a lot of questions. I'll start from the left, since you spoke last.
Yeah, I have a similar question to the gentleman just now, and I'm not sure if you've already answered. But what are the kind of analytical tools that you can use to measure the engagement? So what type of engagement, basically?
Okay. All right. Tools are, I think we use a combination of about 20 or 30 tools, so the list is long. But the tools depend on what it is that you're trying to look for. Are you trying to look for engagement in total? Because Facebook gives you those numbers. You've got other things like social watch list. You've got things like code tweet. You've got things like Sprout Social. I mean, there's loads of those things. I'm happy to furnish you a full list of those things. However, again, no two campaigns might even need the same tool. You might want to measure something completely different for today's campaign as opposed to a product launch in 6 months, where you're trying to figure out what the sentiment is. Are people feeling positively about your product or negatively. That's a very different analysis than just counting how many people hit the play button on your video. So I'm happy to give you a list.
How can we integrate the performance of the brand on social media on brand trackers, for example? Because you have the brand trackers that you get from the likes of TNS, for example, or the likes of research companies,
Yes.
and they do track your monthly top of mind,
Yes.
likability,
Yes.
switches, number of converting customers. So can we know? I mean, I don't know if there's a tool to integrate social media so that we as clients we know from the tracker, the monthly tracker report, that those customers like the brand or converted because of social media.
Okay. I think we've done this in two ways. A is if you have an agency, is it an agency running the brand tracking for you? Right. Now, I think it tends to depend on, let me give you an analogy, right? Back in the day, an advertising agency did advertising. Today, an advertising agency, it becomes your social media agency. They also claim to do your websites and mobile apps. So it's a little bit broad because you've got to stay relevant. Similarly, I think the agency that helps you track front of mind and market share should ideally be equipped with those tools. If they don't have those tools, then you as clients have a right to demand of them to use specific tools that you define and say, when I get my report, I'd like to see stats summarized on one page from everything. So I think you're going to need to take the initiative if your agency hasn't already. That's the ideal way of doing it. Or you can come to a company like us where we'll do pure analysis on social media and we'll send that to you concurrently as the other agency sends you other stuff, and you then combine the two and make sense of it both. So I think there isn't really a magic solution to that, unfortunately. Does that answer your question? A little bit? All right. Right here, Mo.
Hi. I think you kind of underestimated the research value of social media in your 6 tips. And one of the greatest things about Facebook is, for example, as a bank, it would tell you what product will be most adopted out of all the fans that have opted in interest into your brand.
Sure. That was actually my third point about learning. Now, it has to become a primary learning tool for you. So it's pretty much like having a research firm that's on retainer for you, except that you're doing it yourself. So absolutely, if you're not able to, I gave you the example of a chef. That's a very simplified example. In the case of a bank, that would be, are people more inclined to go for an insurance product as opposed to a credit card product? And if it's a credit card product, are they more inclined to doing a lower limit application or a higher limit application? So yes, so this stuff is something you've got to try and track on a daily basis, and ideally should impact pretty much all your departments. Because you can't just say this report is going to go to the management, because the management is going to be a bit too broad for them. So ideally you should say this is relevant to the marketing department, this is relevant to operations, this is relevant to the telephone service because they take 6 minutes to pick up the phone. All of these things are things that we pick up because on social media it's open-ended. You're not asking them fixed questions. You're actually opening the floodgates and they come to you. So the tabulation of this is something that needs to be done by either yourselves or an external agency to make sense of it all. But yeah, no, I don't disagree with you at all. I actually probably didn't spend as much time on it, but you're right.
No?
Gave up the question.
Any other questions? I have a question, actually. You discarded credit card as irrelevant.
Business card?
Yes.
Yes.
Wouldn't you call these leads? I mean, they have a value, don't they?
Sure.
So.
Okay. If your management was to ask you, I mean, I know you're your own boss, so you don't have a management, but in the case of somebody else, if you say, how many business cards did you collect at this exhibition? And I say, I've collected 673 cards. Do you think they're going to put a monetary value on those leads? I don't think so. I think it becomes very difficult at the lead. Now, once you've picked up the phone and called them and figured out whether or not they're interested, that's awesome. Then we're doing something with a like. So imagine handing a card over as hitting the like button. Once you've hit the like button, say I put up a post about something, and of those 50 people that handed me the business card, 2 responded. I know that those 2 are worth something because I could do something with them. I can actually engage in a conversation with them.
You don't think the likes have a domino effect where someone else will view it and possibly engage as a result?
Agreed. My only point is that brands are obsessed with likes and likes alone. You see, where it's nothing beyond likes. So at the end of the monthly review meeting, it's about how many likes you have. And well, we didn't get to our target, so I think you guys are crap. So let's move on to something else. I think it's about balancing the act on all of the metrics. and figuring out what it is that you want. If your objective is really to just go after the mass market, then that's a very different objective. Then let's define that and move it on. But then you don't need to spend money on engaging sort of external parties to do that. You can do that yourself. It's about finding the finer details of what can help your business and push the right messaging forward, or tweak your product in itself. I think that's obviously very interesting. Anything else I can help with?
Questions? Okay.
And how do you tailor-make solutions depending on industries? For example, I've done FMCGs, right? With FMCGs, specifically multinationals, they are more strategic in their approach.
Yeah.
So they're fine, and they do understand, the brand love mark, and those kind of terminologies. So they're not really after sales from social media.
Correct.
Otherwise, explain for me the huge amount that Pepsi spends behind stores, for example, while Pepsi is Pepsi, with 80% market share in MENA region. Okay. Now it's different in retail, where it's very tactical.
Correct.
You have to deliver sales. It's daily tracking for sales, while in FMCG, at best, you track sales monthly.
Sure.
So there must be different solutions for different industries. So
sure.
Do you have any comment on that?
I do, because we happen to manage an FMCG brand within a global FMCG group, and we also happen to manage 2 major retail groups. So I'll tell you how we go about reporting to both of them. Again, it's not the same tools. They're 2 very separate tools. Now, when it comes to the retail, we try and drive tactical sort of footfall to a physical store that then is identifiable. So let's take an example of a paint company, for example, all right? Now, as a paint company, what can you do on your Facebook page to drive people to buy more paint? We know from our research that you don't paint more than 8 times in your lifetime. That's very few number of times that you paint in your entire life. Now, of that, we want to try and measure how many people that we've driven, and we might catch you for one of those paint cycles, not more. We try and do a tactical competition or campaign whereby if you go in and you're able to identify yourself as a fan on Facebook, you actually get something back. Now remember, what you get back doesn't have to be monetary. It could be delight. It could be something that makes you feel a little bit special. So it needn't cost you a 15% discount. It actually needs to cost you something that makes them feel special. So in the case of retail, you've got to try and sort of tag this into something tactical. In the case of an FMCG brand, you've noticed a lot of campaigns on Sheikh Zayed Road that show the like counts, etc., of major brands that are sort of consumables. And with them, I think using the packaging of the physical brands of the physical product is an awesome tool to be able to drive people to the page. Once people come to the page, that's up to you what you do from there. So you run a competition purely for mothers because you know that the mom segment is quite hot for a product. Or you do it for people on Valentine's Day that are looking to shop for a gift. I mean, these are conversations that you can own once you've got the lead in. So the like gives you a lead in to the room. Once you're in the room, it's your job to convince them with other things and keep their interest going. So that's perhaps less tactical. Retail is a lot more tactical. Then it's about footfall. And footfall will then lead to sales, of course, and that gets connected. But footfall becomes your primary metric, not so much sales in that case. I'm happy to discuss actual live case studies after. I just can't do that in public.
Great. Thank you very much, Dinesh.
No problems at all. Thank you, guys.